you've just been watching that again for the first time in a while?
Yes, it came out. I haven't seen it.
Oh wait, can we get the mic up?
Sorry, not
There we
good
go.
with the microphone.
So first time since it came out, wow.
Yeah.
How was it?
And it was so. I mean, look, all of those actors. I'm just, as you can tell, having just seen it, just a small part of it, but to see Heath, it was really, yeah.
It's amazing. So, I mean, I'm fascinated by the process of this film because usually, if you have actors playing the same character in different eras, for example, they might get together, they might talk about we need to do certain mannerisms the same way, we need to share certain characteristics. And I feel like in this film, it was almost the opposite of that. You almost want to be presenting completely separate, completely distinct characters that have a very thin through line of Dylan-ness in different eras.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I mean, because it was all about identity avoidance, really, and the way Todd started, I think, with all of us, is he provided us all with a mood board and a playlist, and so there was a particular rhythm that you were going in, but none of us discussed it at all, really. Yeah.
But you were on set at the same time,
No, there was a bit of overlap, but not really.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so fast and furious and low budget, and so, I mean, the film kept falling apart every second Wednesday. And then we all got paid 10 grand, and we all had to put the 10 grand back in to keep the film going. So it was literally get in and get out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was incredibly memorable.
Yeah.
I think it was just, there's something about the way Todd works. I don't know if you've, I don't even know if it's possible to see because the estate didn't give the rights to have, for him to use the music, but his student film was the Karen Carpenter story done with Barbie dolls. And there's something, so still in the greatest possible way of him being a student filmmaker. And I think he thrives on that. He's able to harness that chaos.
Yeah. Sorry, I think that was me. So you're the first Dylan whose face we see, which I'd forgotten until I rewatched this last week.
Yeah.
And you're kind of, I guess, for a lot of people, the most kind of recognizably Dylan-y Dylan. Is that how it feels to you? I don't know. Did you have to go back and watch a lot of, archival footage and stuff at the time?
It was fantastic actually because we got all the outtakes from the Penny Baker documentary, and I was making a film about Elizabeth I,
Yes.
and losing weight and watching all of these Bob Dylan clips, these interface with the press, which was so inspiring and so elliptical and strange and poetic. And then I literally stepped off the set of that on a Saturday morning and then flew to Montreal and started filming on a Monday. So I literally, I sort of was semi-conscious, I think, making the things.
Probably about right.
But yeah, I think to your point, I think that silhouette is so recognizable that in a way the only way to do it was have a woman in there, because then you're actually saying, this is not what you think, this is not who it is, and it puts it one step away from risking imitation, I think.
Yeah, gives you that slight remove, so you can have comments.
Yeah.
No, it does, I think. So, by the way, I'm going to open up to questions from the floor, so please do, get your thinking caps on, get your thoughts in order.
Or don't.
Or don't, yeah. But, I think I've read somewhere that you persuaded Haynes to cut a kind of hallucinatory scene for your character. Did you have a lot of input like that into your role and sort of a lot of conversations about what you guys were doing together?
You mean to cut it out or
to cut it out? That's what he said in an interview I read.
Oh, then he must be right. It was a very kind of musical process, I think, for Todd, and in post-production there were constant calls from one of the producers who, not Christine, but who will remain nameless, the one who's now in prison, who wanted to chop a whole section out.
Wow.
And I, like all of the actors, said this is Todd's film, and it's what he wants to stay in stays in.
Yeah, absolutely right. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Because we have a roving mic, so just wait for the mic to get to you, but we will come to you first, please. So if you can go with that. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Good morning, Kate. I really admire the work that you've undertaken with refugees. Here.
Hi.
I really admire the work that you've undertaken with refugees. I represent thousands of refugees.
So this is not a question about Bob Dylan?
No.
No, okay.
Is that okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Is it?
Yeah.
And refugees and displaced persons who've suffered from sexual violence, Rohingya, Ukraine, Sudan, and we're trying to get their story out. And we're often told it's too miserable, it's too depressing, but they've, quest for justice is inspirational, many of them women, and I think it could give hope. Do you have any recommendations how we can get these stories out that people would listen?
Well, I mean, yes, I think it's an incredibly important point, and I think that because there are so many people, I think when I started working with UNHCR, there were almost 60 million people around the world internally and externally displaced, and now there's 120 million, and that's just in 10 years, and so that's shocking. But I think there's so many individual stories that actually have surprising aspects to it, like resilience and hope and invention, that actually challenge that sort of narrative about people coming with their hands out. And I always think, it's there, but for the grace of God go I, and I've spoken to so many filmmakers. Agnes Hollins has just made a film, The Green Border. I mean, there's so many films out there, but I think where the distribution platforms often are more fearful than the audience are in receiving it. So I think that there's we're trying to develop a program at the moment that actually helps to scaffold displaced filmmakers themselves to tell their own stories. But I think there's so many avenues to tell them in short form and long form, and you just got to keep pushing it, because I think audiences are far more curious than the people who distribute those stories.
I think that's true of this film actually as well, that people are more daring maybe than Hollywood executives on average.
No, but it is, and I mean we say Hollywood executives, but I mean there's, I don't even know what Hollywood is anymore, what the film industry is anymore. It's so, you can be depressed about it on one level, but you can also be excited that churn can produce something new, and there's many different ways to get those voices out.
Absolutely. Any more questions? Okay, here in the front row, please. By the way, we will have Sally Al-Husseini here this afternoon, who made The Swimmers. So if you have questions about refugees...
Oh, great.
Yeah. Sorry, yes, hi.
Yes, hi Kate. First of all, your performance here is incredible in this movie. But as a big Tar fan, I want to ask you, do you think Lydia would like to listen to Bob Dylan?
Oh yeah, she had Bob Dylan on repeat. I remember I made a film years ago with John Cusack, and he said he'd never want to play a character who wouldn't listen to Dylan.
That's a great way of thinking about it.
But I sort of understand what he means.
Yeah, and it feels like his energy is right for that as well.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But I think she would have been, like I am, inspired by his, refusal to be entrapped by other people's expectations or other people's questions. Questions can often be traps.
Thank you.
No question. Can you just pass it back? There we go. Thank you.
Hi. I was just interested in what your perception of Bob Dylan was like growing up, just being like a member of the public, and how that kind of shifted as you actually took on the role, got really enmeshed in it.
Yeah, I was deep in the period that Heath and Charlotte are examining in the film. That's what my entry point to him was. And then I think ultimately I love the yearning in his songs, the reaching, and I remember just when I thought I understood a vague sense of who Bob Dylan as a creative genius was, then he released Modern Times, and I went, it was like a completely different voice. But I think, what I was listening to a lot here, which I hadn't really lived in, was the Highway 61, which I just was so energized by.
Anybody else? Okay. Can you maybe just pass it to people that way, and then we'll come to you, and then we'll go over to you.
I know this film has actually changed people's lives seeing it when I was growing up. The way that we perceive identity, like you were saying about it being part of that. And it just made me think how interesting it is that it's so much about the power of art, your role, what Dylan's saying there. And so by virtue of just replaying the role, there's something inherently powerful and oxygenating the issues, like political issues, but in a really subtle way. And I was wondering if what your process was around the power of art, if you had a specific process, if you went into the political era at that time, and
For this.
yeah.
I really went into the music, and
Yeah.
I went in through. I found what was in the documentary that charts his tour in '66 was one narrative, but then you see the outtakes, and it's another narrative entirely, and so you're watching the command and the playfulness in front of the press, but then the outtakes are all about the cost and the mental collapse, and so you knew somewhere between those 2 or 3 or 5 narratives there's truth. And I think something that I find not frustrating, but anything one says about the work or the world is just it's something amusing can become a manifesto when it's actually not. And what I love about the way Todd works, and what I'm so inspired by Bob Dylan's work, and I think this film really speaks to it, is that artists have to make their own rules, and artists must be inconsistent. And we don't want that inconsistency from our political leaders, but they also have to be able to change their mind, because the world is, as we know, goes without saying, it's immensely complex. And I think that's what the film really, I really gravitated to, an incredibly explosive political era that gave birth to so many narratives that we're now unpacking. He was asked to give incredibly simple responses, when in fact he was just throwing a stone into the pool, and it's not his job to interpret it or to be responsible for it, in a lot of ways. I don't know if that answers your question.
Can you just pass it back to the lady in the Cate Blanchett t-shirt?
Hi. Sorry, I'm kind of crying because I'm really happy. Mind if I ask a question about Carol?
Yeah.
Okay. So, do you know in The Price of Salt, it's obviously from Therese's perspective, and at the end, it says like Carol waves to Therese in a way that Therese doesn't recognise. Yeah, but in the film it's more of a stare, and I think it changes kind of the tone of the ending. And I was just wondering, maybe Todd decided that, but yeah, was that intentional?
You mean when Therese comes and finds, in the film, when she comes and finds her in the restaurant?
Yeah, and she doesn't wave, it's more like a gorgeous stare.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things to achieve in film is something that is many things at once, that is ambiguous. And none of us wanted to say what was going to happen next, but it had to be a complicated, ambiguous, open-ended moment. So, it's interesting you say that, and then I've had other people say that they felt it was a moment of deep connection, and so hopefully it's all of those things.
Yeah, I thought the film ended on a more positive note than the book, but that's just my...
Yeah, but you've got to remember when the book...
I liked it.
Remember when the book came out, it was the first piece of fiction. Lesbians didn't even exist. It wasn't even worth prosecuting. Being a lesbian wasn't even illegal. It was so unimportant or unrecognised. But I think it was the first book that was written that didn't have a tragic ending or the woman being redeemed by the love of the good man. So...
Thank you.
Okay, we had a couple more. Now, I said I was going to come this way. Was it you? It was you, wasn't it? Could we pass the microphone along to the shiny waistcoat here, please?
Hi. I was wondering what was the most challenging thing about playing Dylan, and what did you learn from Todd Haynes whilst filming I'm Not There?
I learnt how to, I think always encouraged all of us to not try and connect all the dots. That somehow, that you knew what was, the script was great, but it was a document from which Todd was going to make the film. Oren's a great writer, but not to try and too much sense of it all. And what I loved about the section I was in is a real Fellini-esque quality. It was one of my all-time favourite filmmakers. So, there was a real freedom to the way Todd was working. So anything could be tried, and you knew that he was going to make somehow musical sense of it. It didn't have to make psychological sense. But what else was there?
What was the most challenging thing about playing Dylan for you?
I felt liberated, actually, simply because I wasn't male, and so I felt incredibly free. I mean, I said to I don't play the guitar, and so I had to learn a bit. My husband said, "Don't worry." At that point, Bob was barely playing the guitar, so he liberated me from that fear. But it's always the way. It's like when you were playing someone who's a musician or someone who's a painter. Like, it's always that moment. There's a little bit with Charlotte, and she does it so well. She's got that focus of a painter, but I'm always like, please don't turn the canvas round. I don't want to see, because I know you're not a painter. But I think because I wasn't even male, there was a kind of, once removed from the man himself, as all the characters were, and you knew that somehow it was a group mind or a group playing of that person, because he is so deliberately and eternally elusive. And I think that's why we keep seeking him.
Okay, can you pass it back diagonally to the lady in the biker jacket, please, who had her hand up first?
Hi, Kate. Really enjoyed the movie. Do you think you would ever take the challenge again of playing a man in the future? And also, do you think Hollywood should be throwing the rule book out in terms of who plays who when it comes to casting, whether it's colourblind casting or gender-based roles?
That we should throw out the rule book?
Yeah.
I didn't know that there was one, except that a lot of people have been excluded from our screens in the mainstream for a long time. And I think to me it's all part of a long process. I think when you start opening the doors and removing the default setting of homogeneity, which is the enemy of anything you're trying to create, homogeneous thought. If everyone in the room looks like you, it's going to be pretty arid, I think, the outcome. I think when you start throwing that door open, it's going to be swing one way and then it will swing back another way. And I think that's the thing with art, it's a pendulum. And I think the minute it stops and we say, this is what it is, I mean, that's where Dylan's so inspiring. It has to keep moving, and so I think we should constantly be examining the quote-unquote rule book. Definitely.
Would you like to play a man in the future again?
Would I like to play a man in the future? I've never thought I even wanted to play Bob Dylan. It was even on the cards. So it's always the ask of a director. I'm not someone who sort of options things for me to be in and squeeze my way into something. It's always when someone comes along and says, would you play this? Or would you play that? So I have nothing in my sights.
Amazing. I'm so sorry, everybody. That is all the time we have, because you have to go and see some music. You're at
I
Glastonbury.
do, as do all of you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all your questions.